laying out Washington, D.C. This is Season 3 of Revolutionary War Rarities. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We are the podcast from the Sons of the American Revolution. My name is Jim Griffith.
And my name is Jim Maple.
And Jim Maples, we're in a very special place today. Again,
yes, we are.
We're in the Crake Room of the Genealogical Library in downtown Louisville, Kentucky, that's owned by the Sons of the American Revolution. So if anyone that's out there is watching today and you happen to be in Louisville, go to the Big Bat across the street, which is the Louisville Slugger Museum. Look directly across the street and you will see the Sons of the American Revolution Genealogical Library.
That's true.
So, you know, Jim, we have always learned that the District of Columbia was created from parts of Maryland and parts of Virginia. And we know that is true. But I wonder how many people know the history of this event, how it occurred, how large it is, where it was placed, the very real fact that the original survey markers that were placed in 1791 and 1792, most are still in existence today. They're still there. You can see them.
Okay.
Not all of them.
Well, Jim, most people are aware that George Washington chose the location of the capital city. An act of Congress gave Washington the responsibility to choose the location, but also provided some very specific boundaries for the capital city to be located within. That act of Congress is called the Residence Act of 1790. The more formal name of the act is also called an Act for Establishing the Temporary and Permanent Seat of the Government of the United States.
So the act was passed during the second session of the first United States Congress, and it was signed into law by a little-known man named President George Washington on July 16, 1790. But the passage of the act creating the capital for the United States involved a great deal of compromise. There were some legislators that disagreed with the location of the capital and preferred for it to be much further south on the Potomac River. Okay. Now, the compromise was reached when numerous congressmen who opposed the Residence Act were pushing something called the Assumption Bill. The Assumption Bill ultimately became the Funding Act of 1790. So that involved the federal government assuming the debts that each state had accumulated during the Revolutionary War. Ultimately, both acts passed and were signed into law. So what was the result of that?
Well, Jim, the act that gave President Washington the responsibility to appoint 3 commissioners to oversee the project of laying out the capital city, but there was a deadline. The Capitol building had to be completed by 1800, and that couldn't happen until the city was laid out or properly surveyed and marked. The reason for the deadline is because of the compromise that was struck within the Assumption Bill, also known as the Funding Act of 1790. So the commissioners established a surveying team that got to work, and that team consisted of several individuals. Their names were Major Andrew Ellicott, who led the surveying effort, Joseph and Benjamin Ellicott, Andrew's brothers, Isaac Roberdeau, George Fenwick, Isaac Briggs, and an African-American man named Benjamin Banneker.
So President Washington designated the south corner of the capital city to be located at Jones Point in Old Town, Alexandria. Okay. And he did that in a proclamation text displayed on the screen now. The Residence Act called for the capital city to be 100 square miles or 10 miles by 10 miles in size. Once that southernmost point was properly identified and marked, laying out the remaining boundaries became the next task. But here's a bit of trivia for you. Do you know the name of the individual who identified the specific location of the southernmost point of Washington, D.C.? Well, after Washington identified the general area, the specific location was marked by a gentleman named Benjamin Banneker, which you mentioned just a minute ago. He was an African-American mathematician, astronomer, surveyor, and farmer.
A quick pause at this point is appropriate. Numerous sources name Banneker as the individual responsible for identifying the precise location at Jones Point for the first boundary point. However, some believe this to be just legend, as numerous additional sources and documents state that the precise location was identified by Andrew Ellicott. As always, Revolutionary War Rarities hopes that all of our episodes spur interest and further research in the topics discussed so that you can come to your own conclusions. Reference material can be found in the show notes for each episode.
So Jim, after identifying the southernmost point, the marking began. A 40-mile effort in a square or diamond shape, depending on your perspective. They marked off 4 to 10 mile straight property lines, corner to corner.
But here's where it gets interesting. That effort to identify the 100 square mile boundary of Washington, D.C. included the creation and installation of 40 boundary stones.
Okay.
One stone every mile down each boundary line, and most of those stones still exist and can still be seen. That's right. For the most part, the boundary stones of Washington, D.C. placed in 1791 are still there,
Okay.
albeit some are broken or simply aged by time, and there are a few, I believe, that are missing. If you look at the diagram that's on the screen now, you will see the rough location of each stone, and only a few, as we mentioned, are missing.
Well, in 2011, the District of Columbia decided to use global positioning system technology, which is available today, to determine how accurate Ellicott's team was in 1791. The results, Jim, were very impressive. Of course, they were not perfect, as some stones were numerous feet from where they should have been, but the survey was incredibly accurate based on the technology available during that time.
So the next time you're in Washington, D.C. and you see a nondescript stone alongside a street or a park, you may want to stop and take a look.
Yeah.
Those stones may tell a story. And remember that everything you're seeing inside of that boundary exists there today because of the Residence Act and the Funding Act of 1790. And that was largely created, or those acts were largely approved because of the assumption of the debt of the Revolutionary War in each one of the states. It exists today because there was a group of men in Congress willing to compromise for the greater good of the people. Because of those dedicated individuals who walked the 40 miles with surveying tools and did incredibly accurate work.
Yeah.
Oh, there's definitely history in stones, and there is history in the area that those stones ultimately defined. And that, my friends, is a Revolutionary War rarity. My name is Jim Griffith.
And my name is Jim Maples, and we thank you for joining us today. Please remember to join us in 2 weeks for the next episode of Revolutionary War Rarities. This has been a production of the National Society, Sons of the American Revolution, www.sar.org.